Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining me today in the Dr. Matthew Hyland's pilot plant here at Maine. My name is Chef Rob Dumas, and I'm joined today by Dr. Colt Knight from the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, and we're excited to be doing a demo today on beef short ribs for the Agricultural Trade Show for Maine 2021. All right, so let's dive right into this. So today we're going to be talking about beef short ribs. We've got some lovely short ribs here from Casa Cattle in Corinna, Maine. These are a neat short rib in that they're from a Scottish heritage variety of cattle called belted Galloways, and these are grass-fed. So the fat's a little bit different than in a commodity or corn-fed cow. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different areas that the short rib come from, and a little bit about the approach to prepping them for cooking and the different cooking approaches. So, all right, so let's compare these two short ribs. So we got multiple packages of short ribs from the processor, and depending on where it came from within the rib section, there will be more or less meat attached to the bone. So these are an English style in that there is a 4-inch long bone that runs the length of the meat here. Sometimes you'll see Korean style or Kalbi style where they'll actually be cut into thin segments across the bone. But for this, we're going to need to do a little bit of cleanup, and then we are going to approach this with a low and slow cooking method, because while short ribs pack a lot of flavor, they also have a very tough texture that has to be broken down with prolonged cooking. Now, not all short ribs are created equally. Depending on where this is taken from the short rib section, you may have more or less meat. So, for example, this short rib has a lovely bit of muscle running through it called the serratus ventricalis, and it is well marbled, it's very tender, and it is going to be some of the best eating short rib that you're going to get. Whereas this, closer to the chuck end, doesn't have a lot of meat on it, and honestly, after prolonged cooking, there's not going to be a whole lot left. But we'll cook some anyway, so you can kind of see the difference between what a meatier short rib and a less meaty short rib will look like post-cooking. But before we do that, we're going to do a little bit of cleanup. So there is some membrane across the bones on the back, and there is some extra fat and membrane on the top that we're going to take off. So we've got a nice clean cutting board. We've got a sharp boning knife, and we're going to start by removing a little bit of this extra fat on the short rib. Now, this fat doesn't necessarily have to go to waste. This fat can be ground along with other beef for a very tasty burger blend. So you don't necessarily need to throw it out. You can render fat down to make a cooking fat that you could use for cooking French fries or something like that. You do want to be cognizant that you don't take away too much meat. There's not a whole lot here. And you also want to look out for any of this silver membrane, a lot of times referred to as silver skin. That can be quite tough as well. So again, just some very shallow strokes. We're going to get this cleaned up a little bit more. And then I am going to split these into individual rib sections. So when I look at this, I see I've got a bone there and a bone there. I'm going to cut right in between the two bones, and I'm going to separate this into two pieces that I can go ahead and put into my roasting pan. And we're going to approach this a little bit differently than the traditional approach. If you were to Google beef short ribs, 99% of the recipes you're going to come across are going to be for a technique called braising. There's absolutely nothing wrong with braising beef short ribs. I just thought I would show you something a little bit different today. We're going to take a cue from the barbecue world, and we're going to approach cooking this low and slow with dry heat. So I'm going to set those two into the pan, and I'm going to repeat this process of cleaning up on my remaining short ribs. All right, so we're going to repeat this process of cleaning up on our remaining short ribs. So I'm going to go ahead and split that right in half, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to take this bit of tough membrane right off the top here. And again, we're just trying to take away only the extra fat and membrane, and we want to leave as much of the meat behind. If you use your fingers to pull on it a little bit, you may be able to separate away that membrane from this remaining meat a little bit easier. But again, you know, not necessarily waste. Could be a dog treat, but you know, some of these don't have a whole lot of meat on them, so you may even want to just clean these right off of the bone and go ahead and take that and grind all of that meat right into a burger grind. But in just a minute, we'll work with our bigger, meatier chops, and we'll go ahead and we'll see what a little bit meatier rib would look like. Just 1 second. So we've got that right off. I would normally cut away a little bit more of that, but there's not a whole lot of meat left behind if I do, so we'll set that aside. Now, our better looking, bigger bad boy short ribs here, we're going to cut this right down the middle, and you're going to see all of that nice marbling from that additional muscle there. So that's going to eat really well. This is really what you're looking for if you have the opportunity at a butcher's counter or something like that to choose your short ribs. Always choose the short ribs that have that marbled bit of meat across the midsection. That's going to be your tastiest short rib with the most bang for your buck in terms of meat post-cooking. Okay. With these, I'm going to start by pulling off this membrane on the back here of the bone, and that will just pull right off like that. That should not be included in burger. That should be discarded. I'm also going to do a little bit of cleanup here on the top side. There's a very gnarly bit of cartilage and fat here under this little bit of meat, and I'm just going to take that right off, and that's going to give us a better finished product post-cooking. And again, this top fat here, you can certainly use this for burger grind or something like that. It doesn't have to just be waste. Okay, and again, we want to leave as little meat on that fat as possible, so be careful as you're cutting. A little bit of meat's inevitable, but now what we've got is a nice meaty rib. We're going to season this up in just a minute, and that's going to eat real well. We're going to repeat that process on this one. Again, just taking off that extraneous bit of fat cap, just because it's not going to render out, not going to be super yummy to eat. I find with a good sharp butcher's knife, short strokes help limit the opportunity for mistakes a little bit as you're working through, kind of rolling that fat away. And again, now we've got a nice chunk of meat. We're going to peel away that membrane on this one as well. This is kind of optional, but some folks in the barbecue world would say this is absolutely essential. And if you're having a hard time getting a grip on it, sometimes using a paper towel or a clean towel can help you get a little bit of grip on it. I also find giving it a little scrape with your knife can help loosen that up a little bit as well. And it should just peel right off. Here we go. You'll hear that kind of tearing noise as it separates away. And then we'll just repeat this process with this last rib here. And then we will go ahead and get these into our pan. We're going to season these today with a barbecue style seasoning. We're going to use Bub and Mother's Down East Dinner Dust. Really fun spice. If you're not familiar with Bub and Mother's, they're a local company doing some fun blends of spices for barbecuing and cooking. They've really got some interesting stuff in there with dried wild blueberries, dried maple or granulated maple syrup. So really a fun product, very tasty, and I certainly would encourage you to give it a try. They're also putting a lot of effort into supporting veterans down east. So great company, great product, and it will be really tasty on our ribs today. So I'll pop these right into the pan as well. And we're going to do this last one, then we're going to season. And our cooking approach today, as I mentioned, is going to be a low and slow, dry heat approach as opposed to braising. By low and slow, we're going to cook at 250 degrees in a convection oven. And we're going to cook these ribs until they're tender. So, you know, that time could vary a little bit depending on the beef that you buy. But you're probably looking at somewhere between 3.5 and 5 hours in order for these to reach a point of complete tenderness. And when they do, the meat will be succulent and juicy and tender and just fall right off the bone. If you undercook them, the meat will be tough and kind of stringy. The muscle fibers in this are quite long. You will see it recede back on the bone quite a bit. So this big piece of meat will probably end up being, you know, much smaller once it's actually roasted. But we're going to put those in. We're going to go ahead and finish off our bub and mothers here, get them nice and seasoned up. And then I'm going to add in just a little bit of water. I'm going to roast these uncovered. You do want to season all sides of the meat. You don't need to season the bottom of the meat because it's just bone, and that part will not really contribute much to the flavor, but you do want to season the sides. And I think that we're going to get these right in the oven, and in just a little bit we'll show you the finished product along with some yellow eye peas and a little bit of a lovely root vegetable salad. So stay tuned. We'll be back in just a little while. We've had our ribs in the oven for about 4.5 hours. We've been cooking them low and slow at 250. The ribs have, you know, gotten to a place where they're nice and tender. A lot of fat has rendered out of them, and I've moved them over to this parchment lined tray where I'm brushing them with a little bit of a maple barbecue glaze. And we're going to put these back in a nice hot oven, and so about 400, 450, and we're going to caramelize the sugars in this glaze onto these ribs. And then when they're done glazing, we'll take them out, we'll clean them up a little bit for a nice presentation, and we'll show you the final plate. All right, well, welcome back. So our ribs have come out of the oven. We cooked them low and slow for about 4.5, 5 hours, and then we started glazing them with a nice little spicy maple barbecue glaze. Took them out of the oven, and at that point what I did is I separated the piece of meat from the cartilage that surrounds the bone, but I like the way the bone looks, so I kept it as part of the presentation. And then I did some nice whole beans, so we use yellow eye beans from Green Thumb Farm with some bacon, maple syrup, molasses, and then a lovely little root vegetable slaw here. So very similar to like your coleslaw, except that instead of using cabbage, we're using a blend of turnips, carrots, beets, radishes, a little bit of scallion in there, dressed in a cider vinaigrette. So really tasty, great seasonal dish. Actually, all these root vegetables are from my own root cellar, so pretty cool to be able to put them on a plate here in the winter in Maine. So enjoy.